This video is brought to you by Captivating History. Considering the comparatively small size of the continent, Europe has had a massive cultural impact on the rest of the world. Initially comprised of very separate countries, Europeans began to mingle, develop intricate social systems, and influence each other. Its rich history and conquest, religion, the arts, industry, and war can be traced back as far as the early tribes of Europe, all the way up to World War II and beyond. Throughout the centuries, there have also been several historical figures whose stories have become legendary. This video highlights some of the most notable periods in European history, showing just how much of a valuable contribution the continent has made to the world that we know today. During the Neolithic Revolution, which ranged from around 10,000 to around 3,500 BC, humans adapted to tools. The use of stone allowed humans to hunt and build on a whole new level, leading Europeans to migrate south. Stone tools started the beginning of agriculture, which led to an increase in population as settlements sprung up around the continent, shifting from hunter-gatherers to farmers. This evolution continued with the Bronze Age to move towards an even more efficient alloy. Learning to melt copper and tin together made a strong metal that could replace materials such as rock, wood, copper, or bones. This again revolutionized farming, food preparation, weaponry, and warfare. The cultures that dominated these eras were the Proto-Celts, Greeks, and the Beaker people, who could communicate linguistically for trading, cross-tribal marriages, and diplomacy. Warfare became commonplace throughout the entire continent, a theme that would feature heavily throughout its history. The Iron Age followed, beginning between around 1200 to 600 BC, which led to intense development, particularly in Wessex. Religion featured heavily in the Briton society also, as Druidism taught of a soul. It was a similar philosophical belief to that of one of the most influential civilizations also flourishing in Europe around the same time. Ancient Greece is one of the most influential civilizations in European history. The Hellas, or modern Greece, also began to urbanize around 500 and 800 BC. However, the Greeks organized themselves into towns faster than their Western European counterparts. Driven by trading, many Mediterranean cultures, including the Greeks, were positioned a week away from Mesopotamia, quickly growing their businesses. By the end of the 5th century BC, Athens was established as one of the major cities of the Mediterranean basin. Not only was Athens a highly architecturally developed city, but it was also the first instance of when Western democracy was practiced. They had no kings and even had an electoral system in place, yet still had slaves. This democratic system would later be mimicked throughout the Hellenation. Education was a major part of this era in Athens. Literature and philosophy flowed during this period, with Homer, Pythagoras, and Socrates remaining influential to education today. However, Athens would not remain the same, as the northern kingdom of Macedon, under King Philip II, wished to reunify all parts of Hella, Athens included. On his death in 336 BC, the entire nation was passed to his son, Alexander the Great. Probably one of the best-known figures from Greek history, Alexander made Greece a massive force to be reckoned with over the next 13 years. Greek armies fought their way across northern India and Egypt, with new countries coming under their control. When Alexander died at 32, he left his massive empire to 4 generals after over 20 years of fighting for dominance. The influence of Greek culture was, however, unshakable everywhere it touched. It was arguably even responsible for setting up one of the most formidable empires that the world has ever seen. In 146 BC, the Roman Republic and the Hellas met on the battlefield, leading to Rome's victory. The Greeks highly influenced many successful Roman cities, basing their style on Athens and similar cities. Julius Caesar was responsible for the rise of the Roman Empire. By the time of his murder in 44 BC, the Republic had become an empire. Rome had become a power that could challenge Greece. For a century, the Romans occupied Greece. Athens attempted to rebel in 88 BC, which was now struggling economically due to the Romans' disorganized approach to their taxes. In 30 BC, Roman Emperor Augustus claimed Egypt and ended the reign of the Greeks. The Roman Empire was a vast and wealthy civilization at its peak. This included land extending from Britain and Western Europe to Mauritania, North Africa, Egypt, and east of the Mediterranean Sea, including Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Anatolia. Rome did help to spread the philosophical, political, and educational ideas that originally had come from Greece. Rome also spread the ideology that strong economies were founded on slavery, an idea that would return again throughout history. When the original Roman Empire collapsed, rebuilding Europe changed it completely. The Catholic Pope was seated in Rome, with the majority of Europe under the control of various monarchs. Europe was thriving, with wealth, power, and strong armies, mostly connected through Catholicism. The Vikings' counterparts in Normandy, a small area of the English Channel, had succumbed quite willingly to the rule of Rome. By the 11th century AD, the Normans were Christians, but they still enjoyed raiding and plundering. This, in turn, would eventually completely change the political landscape of Europe. William, the Duke of Normandy, was born in 1028 AD. Although the illegitimate son of Robert I, he still succeeded in replacing his father. Despite his rocky journey to the throne, William desired to retain and extend his power. He even wanted to challenge the Franks' authority. He decided that to do this, he would need to marry an ally. So he married Matilda of Flanders, heiress to a neighboring Dutch realm. William took back Normandy from the Franks and became famously known as William the Conqueror. Crowned King of England on Christmas Day in 1066, this marked the beginning of his long reign. It was also the start of the feudal system, which indentured peasants working to rent their speck of land as formal slavery declined. Culturally, at least for art and literature, the Renaissance has been one of the most influential periods in history. The term meaning rebirth in French refers to the ideals of the Greeks and Romans or the classics. The period ran from the 14th to 17th century, with Florence and Venice as the epicenters of this movement in Italy. Marco Polo is a famous figure from this era. Born to a merchant family in 1254, he learned and understood the importance and value of the import and export trade. His travels to the Silk Road around this period involved trading rare in-demand goods such as tea, pearls, gold, and spices, while exploring India, Asia, Mongolia, and China. The medieval Italians, such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, very much embraced knowledge and art. They studied art, architecture, literature, math, and science. These men combined several of these subject areas into their work and inspired the term Renaissance man. While Italy was undergoing a calm cultural change, Western Europe was involved in constant battles. The English House of Plantagenet and the French House of Valois had been fighting over the right to rule France since 1337 in the Hundred Years' War, and they were still at it in the mid-15th century. Generations of English kings had claimed rights to Normandy and other parts of France, despite these regions being separate since 1204. Jeanne d'Arc, better known as Joan of Arc, is the most famous figure from this era in France. Born in 1412, she grew up in a very poor Catholic family. After experiencing a series of religious visions, she demanded to speak with Charles VII. Charles VII had been disinherited years previously by the insane French King Charles VI, allowing the infant Henry VI of England to take the throne. However, despite this, Charles VII still considered himself the King of France. Joan, convinced that God had chosen her to lead the French army, was adamant that she could have him restored as the rightful King of France. Her determination to make this a reality paid off. After traveling to the village of Vaucouleurs, she impressed the local military leader, Robert de Baudricourt, who took her to meet Charles VII at his court. From there, Charles equipped Joan for battle and sent her to Orleans. When Joan was thrown from her horse in battle outside Compiègne, she was taken prisoner and sold to the English. The 19-year-old was interrogated and tortured for several months in a military prison before putting her on a trial that aimed to mock France. She was found guilty of heresy by the English clergy and sentenced to death. On May 30th, 1431, she was burned at the stake. Even after her death, Joan of Arc's story inspired many of the French. Charles VII eventually won. When Philip the Good of Burgundy changed sides to support him as the King of France, the Hundred Years' War ended. European philosophy and intellectual movements have featured heavily in European history over the centuries. While the Renaissance brought with it a yearning for knowledge and a strong desire to see everything the world had to offer, the Age of Discovery brought about a desire to explore. This period was fueled more for economic reasons and competition with other colonial forces, as strong kingdoms took to land and sea to explore. Commerce was a large driving force behind this desire, as kings funded trips to distant lands. As new philosophical ideas circulated Europe, more began to examine the role of religion. Even the aristocracy had now begun to question the predominant religious power in Europe, the Catholic Church. This questioning gave way to one of the most significant religious splits in European history, the Reformation. The Protestant religion is said to have begun in 1517 with Martin Luther's pamphlet, the 95 Theses. Luther hoped to inspire a reorganization of the Catholic Church and remove the profitability from religious life. He believed that the payment of indulgences, or fees paid to the Church to counter sins, was a misuse of power. The Church was not happy about this, excommunicating Luther in 1521. However, Martin Luther's work became quite influential with many people across the breadth of Europe. In particular, the German states were quite interested in becoming Protestant, with many rulers eventually converting. A key part of the Protestant religion and its adoption was divorce without papal consent. This new rule made it easier for Henry VIII, once converted, to divorce as he pleased, appointing Thomas Cranmer as the Archbishop of Canterbury and himself as the head of the Church of England. This led to a definite split from Catholic Europe and Britain and a loss of power for the Pope. The Age of Enlightenment was another philosophical movement that was highly influential on the cultural milieu of the times. Focused on knowledge, science, and learning, and questioning religion and authority, it may have contributed to certain movements throughout Europe that sought to create democratic societies and fight the hierarchies associated with monarchies. This movement coexisted simultaneously with several revolutionary periods, particularly in France, from the late 17th century to 1815. Much of the rich history of Europe can be found in France, especially when it comes to the French Revolution. Reaching its climax in 1789, this was the beginning of the end for the feudal system in France, as peasants demanded better rights, including full land ownership. By 1789, France was one of the most populated countries in Europe, with over 26 million people. However, difficulties due to its heavy war participation and crop failures, the economy was in trouble. During this period, King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, crowned in 1774, were at the helm of the Palace of Versailles. Used to a life of luxury, they could not sort the country's budget out and could not identify with the common person's plight. Frustrated by the country's economic situation, the workers of France created the National Assembly, a parliamentary body that worked separately. Many were members of the Jacobean Club, a radical political group that wanted to remove the monarchy completely. This assembly grew within mere months, even with clergy and nobles joining. In 1791, the National Assembly created the first written constitution of France after King Louis XVI had fled France. While monarchy was retained, sovereignty was held in the Legislative Assembly and put in place by an indirect voting system. The National Assembly changed its name to the National Convention and announced that France was now a republic. Both King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette were beheaded in 1793. But the turbulence in France did not end there. The Terror was 10 months of violence and assassination under Jacobin Maximilien Robespierre, fighting counter-revolutionaries and foreign armies whose monarchs declared war on the new Republic of France. Under Robespierre's regime, up to 40,000 people were killed before he was executed. When the situation had calmed somewhat, once again, France reorganized itself, creating the Directory. This 5-member committee would rule until 1799. This calm, however, was short-lived. That same year, a famous military hero, Napoleon Bonaparte, would instigate a coup, making himself the nation's leader. In 1804, Napoleon declared himself Emperor of France. Within a year, after successfully invading Italy, he crowned himself King of Italy. He then moved on to defeat the forces of Austria, Prussia, and Russia. After combining forces with Tsar Alexander I of Russia, the two forces attacked Spain and Portugal. By 1812, Napoleon had control of countries such as France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. However, this was not enough for Napoleon, who then attacked his ally Russia. Great Britain, however, was one of the only truly independent European nations that could threaten Napoleon's greedy acquisition of nearby lands. The British Navy successfully prevented the French invasion, and when in 1814 Prussia joined Britain and Russia, some headway was made in fighting Napoleon. That same year, Paris was captured, and Napoleon went into exile. However, this was not the last that would be heard of Napoleon. He returned to reclaim his empire and was finally defeated by English and Prussian forces at the Battle of Waterloo in the Netherlands in June 1815. Finally, he was exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821. Science was a key component in the development of Europe's industry. By the 18th century, factory machines were commonplace, improving productivity and changing the entire way Europe's labor force worked. Not only could these factories now produce more fabric and foodstuffs, but they were now prepared to mass-produce weapons for what was to come. World War I, or the Great War, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Not only was the scale of the destruction brought to a new level through industrialization, but it also involved powers outside of Europe. The war left 16 million dead, featuring new military technology and trench warfare, and ran from 1914 to 1918. The fighting began in June 1914 after the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria by Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip in a bid to end Austro-Hungarian rule over his country. Austria blamed the Serbian government for the attack. Both countries prepared for war, with the Serbians appealing to Russia for help. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain, and Serbia stood united against Austria-Hungary and Germany within a week. The German armies fought in two directions, invading France through Belgium and approaching Russia to the east, in what was known as the Schlieffen Plan. The first battle took place in Liège on August 4, 1914. The Germans then aggressively entered France, even killing civilians along the way. The First Battle of the Marne followed in September, where the French and British launched a successful counterattack. Many long battles ensued in 1916 in France, lasting several months, including the Battle of Verdun and the Somme. In the east, Russia invaded East Prussia and Poland, but was stopped at the Battle of Tannenberg in August of 1914. Although it was a victory for the Germans, this required redirecting troops from the west, leading to the loss of the Battle of Marne. The Russian Revolution in 1917 also impacted the war. Its role in World War I from 1914 to 1916 and economic pressure increased hostility towards its leader, Tsar Nicholas II, and his German wife, Alexandra. In 1917, under Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, Tsarist rule was ended, and Russia left the war, freeing German soldiers. America was not involved in the war from its beginning, with President Woodrow Wilson preferring to remain neutral. Neutrality changed, however, in 1915, when Germany declared the waters around the British Isles a war zone. German U-boats sank several commercial and passenger-based vessels, many of those belonging to the U.S. On April 2, 1917, Wilson became involved and headed arbitration discussions between both sides. The Ottoman Empire was the first to accept a treaty with the Allies in October 1918, closely followed by Austria-Hungary in early November. By November 11, 1918, Wilson had convinced Germany to accept a truce, and with their lack of resources, the Germans begrudgingly accepted. The Treaty of Versailles was then signed with aggressors agreeing to several conditions, including paying heavy reparations. World War I was significant in that this was the first time that the entire world had had access to modern techniques and equipment. Guns, tanks, cannons, and chlorine and mustard gas were new weapons that increased the devastation to a new frightening level. The Treaty of Versailles was one of the contributing factors to Germany's aggressive actions that led to World War II, which took place from 1939 to 1945. Even more destructive than the last World War, this claimed the lives of over 55 million. There were several different fronts to this war: Europe, Russia, Africa, and Asia. Endless fighting and stretched resources all played a role in deciding each army's tactics and abilities. Although it expanded to outside Europe, its origins are located within Western Europe. The rise of fascist parties across Europe led to Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini coming to power in the 1930s, before Germany's invasion of Poland marked the beginning of the war. The German divisions that forced their way into Poland consisted heavily of tanks and motorized infantry. The Germans easily destroyed the Polish defenses, taking Warsaw on September 28, 1939. With Polish forces ruined, soldiers and high command fled the country. On September 28th, the Warsaw garrison surrendered. However, the Poles had powerful allies in France and Britain. Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939. The fascist armies would invade most of Europe, but the Germans would meet their match with the USSR. Italy fought to invade parts of North Africa. Although initially successful, they eventually ran into several difficulties and needed German reinforcement. Great Britain was also a major force to be reckoned with in World War II. Winston Churchill was ready for war. Germany and Britain spent a large part of the war directly bombing each other's cities, resulting in thousands of civilian deaths. Japan had similar ambitions and wished to claim more land and colonies also. This ambition would later create tensions with the Americans and lead to the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway, and eventually the Americans dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Germany and the Axis powers had been very successful with their invasion of Europe over the first 3 years of the war. However, the siege of Leningrad in Russia had shaken German confidence. Now, even the German soldiers in Africa were being forced back by Allied soldiers. In a nutshell, the Allies took back France, invaded Italy, and the Soviets made some serious headway in Germany. Mussolini was captured and hung in 1945. Hitler, knowing that his plans had failed, committed suicide on April 20, 1945. On arriving in Germany, many of the Allied troops were horrified to discover the concentration camps of Bergen-Belsen and Dachau. These camps, where Jews, minorities, and people with disabilities were interred, tortured, and murdered, are truly one of the most unbelievable parts of the war. On May 7th, General Alfred Jodl signed a surrender with U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower in France. The war ended with Japan surrendering last on August 15, 1945, after the American bomber Enola Gay dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Between these two bombings, over 110,000 people were killed instantly. Thousands more died later from radiation poisoning. This horrific event ended World War II completely. Rebuilding after World War II was different than with the previous war. The Allies removed the Nazis from Germany and helped rebuild the country instead of fostering ill will and causing all countries to suffer. The United Nations was also founded to help countries voice their grievances and settle disputes peacefully to avoid war. However, another war loomed on the horizon, involving communist countries, some in Europe and the rest of the world. Increased suspicion and paranoia regarding each led to the arms race. Both America and the USSR continued to stockpile munitions and nuclear weapons, fostering a sense of fear worldwide. This would lead to more wars outside of Europe, a hard line dividing communist and non-communist countries within Europe, and a tension that would continue into the late 1980s. As Europe entered the second half of the 20th century, many of its nations decided to unite. In the years immediately following the end of World War II, Europe worked together to form what is now known as the European Union. 6 countries founded the group: Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, West Germany, and Italy. With German reunification, the push for EU membership became a priority for much of Europe, including former Soviet countries. Modern Europe is a land of rich cultural history and technological advancement that exists side by side. Europe has never ignored the lessons of its past. It remains a beacon of knowledge and humility to the rest of the world. If you're interested in learning more, check out our book, European History, a captivating guide to the history of Europe, starting from the Neanderthals through to the Roman Empire and the end of the Cold War. It's available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. The links are in the description. Also, if you enjoyed this video and would like to hear more, hit the like button and subscribe for more.